Today's question was seen last week in the USA on the general examination. The question reads, the number of older people moving into retirement is increasing. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this? I will give you a few seconds to read the question to yourself. So the question itself is straightforward, and unfortunately it's a very, very broad question. The background statement here is extremely broad. The number of older people moving into retirement is increasing. So the question doesn't tell us where this increase is occurring or why this increase is occurring. It's just saying that everywhere, apparently, there are growing numbers of older people moving into retirement. So now in responding to questions like this, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult when the question is so broad, because I'm not sure that this statement would actually apply to every country in the world. I mean, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of countries where you know, the population of older people is perhaps not growing. But anyways, this is the question that we're given. Now, the second part asks us, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this? And you know, students often, they write to me and they say, what do I do if I get a question like this? What kind of essay do I write? And this is really, you know, just a modified version of the discussion essay style, because basically you're looking at two sides of a statement. You're looking at the good things that come from a statement and the negative things that come from a statement. So, you know, when we go to structure our essay, we're just going to use the discussion essay style, which looks at two sides of an argument. So, you know, sometimes students write, you know, is there another essay structure that I should be studying for advantages and disadvantages? And, you know, you might have seen it in a textbook somewhere, but it's not necessary to study a completely different structure. You know, we can just modify the structure that we know, the discussion essay structure. Okay, so now that we understand the question and what we are asked to do, which is to present some advantages, to present some disadvantages, the question doesn't ask us to come to any sort of conclusion, but we are going to do that in the essay. So at the end of the essay, we're going to state whether we feel the advantages or the disadvantages are stronger, and just use our opinion as sort of the conclusion to the entire piece. Now let's brainstorm a few advantages and disadvantages together. So when I saw this question in an email that came to me the past few days, a few advantages sort of popped into my mind. I guess the first one would be that you know, as people move into retirement, that means that they're leaving their job, and as the question says, more and more people are moving into retirement, which means more and more people are leaving their jobs. So what this means is it sort of creates job vacancies. And if vacancy is a new word, it just means you know, there's new job spaces because people are leaving. So that's one advantage of people moving into retirement, is that it creates job vacancies for younger people. A second advantage could be that if you have you know, a larger number of older people, typically older people have usually have a better understanding of the world. I mean, they've seen, you know, changes throughout their lives, and they've experienced many more things than their younger counterparts. So perhaps, they could offer a bit of perspective to other sections of a society. So an advantage to having more people would be they would perhaps provide societies, we could say with wisdom. So if you have, a larger number of older people in your society today than you did 50 years ago, then that means you have a larger number of people who have garnered some form of wisdom in the years that they've been here. Anyway, these are the two advantages that just sort of popped into my mind. You might think of one yourself. Now let's look at some disadvantages. Now I think that most people, when they see a question like this, the first disadvantage that would pop into their mind is that typically older people require more medical attention, or at least more medical attention on a more regular basis. So, for someone like myself, I'm 30, I go to the doctor once per year. However, a retired person might, need to see a doctor once every month or every second month, or even more perhaps. So, this kind of puts some strain on medical systems, and we could use this as our disadvantage point. So let's just note it down here. Perhaps that, a larger population of people would strain medical systems to an extent. The second thing that came to my mind when I thought about this was that, this also ties into medical systems to a degree, but to have, older people and more and more older people in society, this can be very expensive for governments. So a lot of services need to be provided for these people, and that can be quite expensive. And then, that sort of rolls down onto the younger workers in a society as well. So it's something that becomes expensive. Now, if we look at the two charts, when we get into our exam, of course, we're not going to draw this diagram, but this is something that we're, brainstorming very quickly in our minds. And for me, I think that the easiest things to argue would be that some of the advantages are that it creates job vacancies, so let's use that one. And in terms of disadvantages, let's say it strains medical systems. Okay, and we don't have enough space to write more than one for each. I sometimes see students, they write 3 supporting paragraphs, for example, 2 advantages and 1 disadvantage, or the other way around, 2 disadvantages and 1 advantage. But when you start doing this, your essay is getting up to 350 or more words, and it's just, it starts to become a little bit of a risk, because when your essay gets that long, then your chances of making grammatical mistakes, lexical mistakes, or mistakes in the wordings that you choose, these kind of mistakes increase, and that's not a good thing. So today we're going to write an essay that presents 1 advantage, 1 disadvantage, and then we're going to come to a conclusion of our own. So let's get started with the essay. Now the question, as we pointed out before, doesn't really state any country in particular, so let's just use a general statement, like, for example, in most countries around the world, we'll say demographics. A demographic is a number for people, so we'll say demographics for aged individuals are increasing year on year. Okay? So in most countries around the world, demographics for aged individuals are increasing year on year. Although this causes no, maybe we can try, although the causes of this are varied. So as we said before, I mean, the question doesn't state any particular reason for the increase in the number of older people. So, we can just assume that the causes are varied. There are many different causes for this. For example, in many Western countries following the baby boom generation, so maybe that's a cause for the growing number of older people. In developing countries, it might just be an increase in the quality of medical care that's allowing people to live longer. So the causes are different for different places. Although the causes of this are varied, the overall trend of geriatric, which is just a word that refers to older people, geriatric, so the trend of geriatric population numbers is ballooning at a rapid rate. Okay, those of you who are studying for the academic task 1, I'm sure you've seen the phrase balloon before, used as a verb. This just means kind of to swell or to grow in a very quick fashion. Now, let's state then sort of the purpose of this essay, which is to analyze the advantages and disadvantages of this situation. So what you can see here is that we've made a statement of the we're making a restatement of the statement that we saw in our essay question, and now we're just going to point out that the purpose of this essay is to look at the advantages and the disadvantages of this statement. So maybe we could say the advantages and the disadvantages of this development, we'll say, will be analyzed in this essay. Okay, let's take it from the top. In most countries around the world, demographics for aged individuals are increasing year on year. Although the causes of this are varied, the overall trend of geriatric population numbers is ballooning at a rapid rate. The advantages and disadvantages of this development will be analyzed in this essay. Okay, so all we've done is we've provided our reader kind of a roadmap. So they know the statement that we're looking at, and they know what we're going to do in the essay. We're going to look at the positive points and the negative points. Now let's go to our first supporting paragraph. And when we're looking at advantages and disadvantages, it's often kind of easy to just use phrases like on the one hand, and then the next paragraph we'll use on the other hand. So on the one hand, having increasing numbers of old people opposes benefits. Okay. Let's share some sort of example here. So for one, now we were going to mention how, oh, I'm going to stick in here actually, of retiring old people. So for one, as people retire, they create job vacancies for other people. So for one, as larger numbers of aged people, as larger numbers of aged people retire and leave the workforce, they create job vacancies for young people. Okay? To illustrate this, I'm going to share an example, and I'm going to use the baby boom generation in North America as that example. So in North America, the baby boom generation is just starting to retire. And this is happening much to the relief of younger generations who are very eager to establish careers, we'll say. Okay, and then all we have to do is tie this back to the fact that this shows how having larger numbers of aged people in a society is a good thing, and how this supports the advantages side of the statement. So as this shows, certain advantages can derive from larger numbers of aged people. We'll say from societies that boast. Okay, so as this shows, certain advantages can derive from societies that boast larger numbers of aged people. Okay, now let's take the paragraph from the beginning. On the one hand, having increasing numbers of retiring old people poses benefits. For one, as larger numbers of aged people retire and leave the workforce, they create job vacancies for young people. In North America, the baby boom generation is just starting to retire, and this is happening much to the relief of younger generations who are very eager to establish careers. As this shows, certain advantages can derive from societies that boast larger numbers of aged people. Okay, so now we've shared some support for the advantages side. Now let's look at the disadvantages. Now we started our advantages paragraph with on the one hand, so here of course we're going to say on the other hand. Now these same people, the ones we're talking about in our example, so this same chunk of people, they require additional medical related help. So require additional medical care, which puts strain on medical systems everywhere. Okay, now I think for our example, we could just use a common sort of ailment that aged people experience. And I'm going to use the example of a hip surgery or hip-related medical help. I know from experience, having spoken to my own grandparents, that often they have problems with, hip-related problems. So perhaps we could say something here about how people that have this problem are having to, wait extremely long periods of time to have it serviced because the medical systems around the world are already so overwhelmed with the number of people making requests for the same sort of treatment. So let's share then, for example, so patients in need of hip work in the UK, the United Kingdom, are having to wait increasingly long periods of time to see doctors, as there simply are not enough medical practitioners to service the demand. Okay, so we're just saying that there are lots of people who have this problem, and there aren't enough people to provide the service in response to this demand. Okay, now let's point out how this phenomena has ramifications on the other demographics of society. So this phenomena has negative ramifications on other members of society as well. Who are waiting for similar treatment. Okay. So what we're saying is that that this is not a problem that is isolated just to the elderly population of a society, but the increasing demand they put on the medical system also affects other people. So this is something that could be considered negative. Now let's conclude by saying how this example shows that having large numbers of older people in a society can be considered a disadvantage. So as this example shows, a larger population of aged people brings with it what to say, can bring with it disadvantages. Okay, let's read through that paragraph again together. On the other hand, this same chunk of people requires additional medical care, which puts strain on medical systems everywhere. For example, patients in need of hip work in the United Kingdom are having to wait increasingly long periods of time to see doctors, as there simply are not enough medical practitioners to service the demand. This phenomena has negative ramifications on other members of society as well, who are waiting for similar treatment. As this example shows, a larger population of aged people can bring with it disadvantages. Okay, now, our conclusion paragraph. So here we just want to kind of state that we have looked at the advantages and we have looked at the disadvantages. And in conclusion, we feel that there are more advantages than disadvantages, or the disadvantages are stronger than the advantages. Now, I think, based on our essay and perhaps, based on courtesy for elderly people, let's say that there are more advantages than disadvantages to their increasing numbers. Now let's try the advantages and disadvantages of this topic are numerous. However, after analyzing both sides, it is felt having a large proportion of older people in the population presents more benefits than drawbacks, we'll say. Okay, very easy. And a nice little conclusion to our discussion of the advantages and disadvantages of growing geriatric populations. Now let's go back to the beginning of the essay and read it together. So please take note of the areas of cohesion that we've used, so phrases that refer to ideas brought up before, and areas where the essay links certain parts to other parts to enhance this sense of cohesion. In most countries around the world, demographics for aged individuals are increasing year on year. Although the causes of this are varied, the overall trend of geriatric population numbers is ballooning at a rapid rate. The advantages and the disadvantages of this development will be analyzed in this essay. On the one hand, having increasing numbers of retiring old people poses benefits. For one, as larger numbers of aged people retire and leave the workforce, they create job vacancies for young people. In North America, the baby boom generation is just starting to retire, and this is happening much to the relief of younger generations who are very eager to establish careers. As this shows, certain advantages can derive from societies that boast larger numbers of aged people. On the other hand, this same chunk of people requires additional medical care, which puts strain on medical systems everywhere. For example, patients in need of hip work in the United Kingdom are having to wait increasingly long periods of time to see doctors, as there simply are not enough medical practitioners to service the demand. This phenomena has negative ramifications on other members of society as well, who are waiting for similar treatment. As this example shows, a larger population of aged people can bring with it disadvantages. The advantages and disadvantages of this topic are numerous. However, after analyzing both sides, it is felt having a large proportion of older people in a population presents more benefits than drawbacks. And that concludes today's lesson. Thank you for listening, and have a nice weekend.